In this topic, we're going to cover how to create, use, and level a fighter class player character. I will examine the basic requirements from an attributes perspective, as well as cover the abilities and various archetypes that are typically available to the player. I will also show you how to set up all of the various actions and categorize them into specific groupings so that they can be more easily found. There will be videos created for each of the various archetypes to help cover explanations specific to their abilities and capabilities, so please keep an eye open for those particular videos. Finally, I will cover how to level the character and show you what changes you might need to make each time you level up. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is show you the modules that I have loaded first, and that will provide a basis for all of the items that we are going to be making use of, or all of the classes and features that we're going to be making use of. So the player's handbook is where your basic fighter class is going to come from. But each of these supplements, not necessarily the Dungeon Master's Guide in this case, but definitely the Xanthar's Guide and Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, all have additional archetypes that are available for the fighter class. In this particular case, Volo's, Mordecai, and the Dungeon Master's Guide do not provide additional archetypes available to the fighter class at this time. That may change in the future. As you can see, I've got all of these modules loaded, so I should be able to very quickly go over to the class selection here and pull out all of the different fighter categories that are available, or fighter options. Now, I've selected the player's handbook one over here, moved it over to the left so that I can distinguish it, but I've got the other two here so that I have them for reference. So I've gone ahead and expanded out the basic character sheet here, and this is the one from the player's handbook. At the top, you will see that there is an image here. Gives you a good little bit of visual inspiration, if you will, to be able to go ahead and create your character. But at the same time, there's good detailed description as well as an example of a quick build on how to set up and create an actual fighter. Fighters have different abilities, and as they get higher in their levels, they gain additional abilities that you can make use of as a player. In addition, I do believe the fighters contain the most ability score improvements out of all of the races, or out of all of the classes, that actually exist. And typically, it is once you're at level 4, you get one again at 6, 8, finally again at 12, 14, 16, and 19. And as far as I know, that is the most skill improvements that you can actually get. Now, what those mean is that you can increase one of your stats by 2 points, increase 2 of your stats by 1 point each, or take a feature at each of those particular levels. Depends on how your DM is going to play it. Also at the bottom, you will see some of the class features, your hit die. In this case, it's a 1d10. Plus you add your constitution modifier to it to get your total hit points. What equipment you are proficient in initially, and whoops, I hate it when I do that. I always grab the window. What your starting equipment is, as well as the tables that you can make use of to pull out that equipment. The initial fighters, or features rather, that you can receive, although in this case it'll be a level 9 before you get that one, so this will be your initial group of features, not those that come from your archetype. And then you have your martial archetypes typically at the bottom. In relation to the supplemental fighter description pages, you will notice that there's going to be a bit of a difference in some cases. So there's additional information, such as the heraldic sign here, instructor, stuff like that. At the bottom, in most cases, you won't find the supplement includes the starting equipment and the link, although it should be fairly similar to what we have here. But typically what you're going to want to focus on is at the bottom here. And that is because you'll notice that there's a different set of archetypes that are provided. And yeah, here's an example of a supplement that isn't providing you the quick link to the tables, and I believe that would be the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide's version of it. Yeah, because that's what the Purple Knight Dragon is associated with. And again, down at the bottom, you will find another martial archetype. In addition to the main tab, some of you may have picked up that there's an Others tab here. And if you select the Other tab in all three of these sheets here, what you'll actually see is a summary of all of the proficiencies and abilities, as well as specializations that you can actually take. The common feature here is that a fighter always has a 1d10 for their fighter level or hit die per level. And if you look here, you'll see that there's a first level proficiency and a multi-class proficiency. With 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, you cannot start multi-class unless you're starting at a level 2 or higher. And the reason for that is that you as a player character only have one skill level of experience to actually go through and pull out the abilities that you're going to initially be using. When you hit level 2, that's when you can actually start multi-classing. And you've gained enough experience, but you're not necessarily happy with the class that you have chosen, so this is when you get to decide to choose another class if you do decide to do that. Now, your character level at that point will be level 2, but each of your class levels are going to be level 1 in those particular classes that you've selected. So let's say you chose Fighter and Wizard as an example. Each of those would be level 1, but your overall character level would be level 2. Keep that in mind because that comes into play later. When you actually start with a level 1 character, these are the proficiencies that you're going to get, and these should be common across all 3 of these sheets. When you take the fighter class as a multi-class for your character, this is the set of proficiencies you add in addition to the proficiencies you already have. Because your base class would have given you your starting set of proficiencies, and it would also dictate what your saving throws for that particular character are going to be for your strongest saving throws. It'll also dictate what your preferred skills are going to be, because you're not necessarily going to be learning additional skills as you multi-class. You are just going to be learning different proficiencies. There's a difference. On top of that, these are all of the abilities that your character can use with one catch. This is a complete list of the fighter abilities as well as the Battle Master, Champion, and Eldritch Knight. So you got to be careful if you're just going to drag and drop an item from here. Although I suppose it does make it a little easier if you're trying to make your own mix of class, which I don't know many DMs that would allow that. But at the same time, at the bottom, you will see the available specializations that that particular class sheet actually goes through and provides to you. And you'll notice that the player's handbook here, which is the leftmost class sheet, is going to be slightly different in what features your character is going to be able to obtain. So, for example, the Cavalier and the Samurai here do not appear on this particular list, and same with the, I believe it's War Magic and the Eldritch Strike, they do not appear here. That's because these abilities are going to be specific to these 3 specializations, and these abilities are going to be specific to these 3 specializations in addition to the fighter class. And that's easily shown if you look at the 3rd sheet here from the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, or is that middle one's from Xanthar's, you'll see that there's a much shorter list of abilities, and that's because there's only one specialization here, so you're only getting the additional abilities that the Purple Dragon Knight specialization provides, in addition to the fighter capabilities that are there by default. So it gives you a nice quick summary of all of the features, and it clears up a little bit of confusion around how you deal with multi-classing from a fighter perspective, in my opinion. Now, the reason why I wanted you to pay attention to the way that I worded the character level versus the class level is because with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you can only achieve, at the time of this recording, a character level of 20. That means if at level 5 you choose to multi-class, and you leave that particular starting class at level 5, you can only achieve 15 additional levels in the class you selected as your multi-class level. That gives you your combined character level of 20, 5 class levels in your starting class, and 15 class levels in the multi-class that you decided to choose. So anybody who wants to go through and multi-class should keep that in mind. You cannot exceed a character level of 20. Okay, so with the limitations defined, we can now begin the process of creating a level 1 fighter class character. Almost. There's something else that you'll want to keep in mind, and that is going to come into play with the martial archetypes. For example, the Eldritch Knight has the ability to cast spells, but typically spellcasting requires something other than your strength and constitution or dexterity to be a decent enough stat for you to be effective in casting those spells. In the case of the Eldritch Knight, the spellcasting ability is intelligence. So in this case, you will also want to make sure that if you have a good enough roll to be able to throw into that intelligence slot, then you'll be able to actually be pretty decent in being able to actually effectively cast spells through an Eldritch Knight. But each of those specializations we'll get into in greater detail when I actually focus on them. I just wanted to point that out, that you do still have to look ahead a little bit when it comes to knowing or keeping in mind the martial archetype that you actually want to go through and make use of down the road. And at level 3 is when the fighter class will actually get their martial archetype, their first level in it. So when you initially start off with a fighter creation, you're just going to be dealing with those general fighter abilities. You won't have to worry about the martial archetype. Just keep it in mind for when you want to get there. So I am going to go through and keep the player's handbook class sheet open for now. And I'm going to create a brand new character for the purposes of creating this particular fighter class. Now, I'm going to use the human race for all of these. You don't have to. The race is completely dependent as to what you as a player want to provide, but to keep things consistent for the creation of these particular videos, I'm just going to simply use the human race, because there are no sub-races really that come into play, except there is the human variant. Finally, before you can actually go through the process of creating your class, you're going to want to make sure that you choose a background that's going to be appropriate to how you as a player want to actually play that particular fighter. And there really are only a handful of backgrounds that make sense when it comes to playing a fighter. Soldier would be an example, maybe Noble Knight, City Watch Investigator to a point, things like that. But don't let that actually be the restriction. If you want to add a bit of challenge to it, then maybe Folk Hero or Far Travel could be useful for something like that, or even one of the other ones that you have here. But generally, players will typically choose a background that will fit within that particular range. Now, for the purposes of our example, I'm just simply going to use City Watch, because it really doesn't provide a whole lot other than this little feature here to create a whole bunch of a mixed bag, if you will, around, oh, this is going to be different for this particular player, stuff like that. No, it shouldn't be that way at all. But this just gives me a consistent starting point, if you will, so that once we get to the point of kicking off the archetype videos, then we can actually go through and focus only on those skills and abilities associated with those particular archetypes. Okay? So, to actually start the process, now that we've got all of the research, if you will, out of the way, you want to first roll your attributes. And if you haven't watched my video on all of the new dice rolling features that come in with Unity, feel free to do so before you continue on with the rest of this particular video, because that's where you'll find a description as to what I'm doing here. Oops, I might have rolled one too many times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. All right, so I'm going to take the first 6. I'm not going to ignore that last one. All right, so a fighter has 2 stats to 3 stats that are typically going to be the ones that you're going to want to primarily focus on. The quick build shows you an example of 2 of the stats. That would be strength or dexterity. And the reason why it's an or there is because if you, as a fighter, are going to only be utilizing weaponry that is associated with the finesse capability, then you can make use of dexterity, because all of your attacks and damage bonuses and whatnot utilize dexterity. If, however, you're looking for pure brawn when it comes to an overall carrying capacity and overall strength, then you're going to want to make sure that strength is your primary stat. The third stat that should be considered your secondary stat, if you'll excuse the expression there, for the other two would be your constitution. A fighter is typically used in the role of a frontline combat specialist. So they're going to want to have extremely high amounts of hit points to be able to absorb that front row of attacks that they're going to be receiving. They're going to be up close, typically in melee combat. Some fighters, like the Eldritch Knight, for example, may be backline combat, but that's generally rare. So you're going to want to look at either strength or dexterity as your primary stat, and then constitution as your secondary stat. Your archetype will dictate your tertiary stat. And in a lot of cases, they will typically piggyback off of either your primary or your secondary stat. But in the case of the Eldritch Knight, for example, which requires a reasonably high intelligence, you could theoretically have a tertiary stat. So overall, I did not get that great of rolls. And I have two options here when it comes to the higher value. Now, keeping in mind that the human race, their ability score increases is a +1 to all of the overall scores. And they're the only ones that can actually affect all of the stats at once. Typically, the other races, like the dwarves, the elves, things like that, they affect two stats. So I believe in the case of dwarves, it's probably strength and constitution, whereas elves, it might be dexterity and intelligence, maybe wisdom. Okay, so I'm going to drop, and you should be able to just very easily drag and drop the values that you want here. So I can either go with a +3 to my strength, or I could, oops, I don't want that, or I could drag the 17 to here and go with a +3 to my initiative. That is actually a tough call. If I restrict this character to finesse weapons, then putting the strength into the dexterity makes sense. But if I'm looking to be able to use large swords, like a two-handed sword, or maybe a warhammer, a great axe, things like that, they're not finesse weapons, and you're going to need strength to be able to deal with those attacks. So I think I'm going to stick with strength in this particular case for the 17, and I will throw one of the 12s into the dexterity. And you can do that. You can adjust these things because nothing is set in stone just yet when it comes to stat modifications. That happens when you drop the race onto the actual character sheet. Constitution, I'm going to drop another 12 into there. Be a little bit useful if I could actually grab it. And for planning in the future for oops, I'm having an issue. Really? Why can't I grab them? I'm going to drop the intelligence into that one. So, charisma. I always have characters that are not that good looking when it comes to that. And wisdom. Alright, so that should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 17, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. Yep. Okay, so I've got all the stats in place. So let's stick with this for now. I may re-roll when it comes to looking at some of the other archetypes, but we'll see. All right, so now I'm going to drop the racial component into place, and this is the order you're going to want to do them. And you'll see that it's brought all of the stats up by 1. Then I'm going to want to drop the class into place. And this is where you will get a bit of a skill selection here. And this is the reason why you'll want your background to be chosen in advance. When you add a background to your character sheet, you're going to get these 2 skills. So you don't need to worry about picking them here. And in fact, doing so, in some cases, some DMs won't allow you to apply double proficiency to those because you've chosen it twice. I personally don't do that. I like to have fairly well-rounded player characters. So if they unintentionally choose a skill that their background then provides, I allow that particular player to go ahead and choose another skill. But some DMs don't do that. They just say, no, I'm sorry, it's gone, you're done. And typically those DMs will be running a much more difficult campaign when they do stuff like that, in the sense of like they're intentionally running a harder campaign. I tend to be a little bit flexible. Now, this guy's got an okay wisdom. Being on the city watch, let's say that he needed a bit of perception. He's going to get athletics. He's not going to need survival. Let's see. Maybe a little bit of intimidation. All right, so I've now added those skills, and you'll see here on your skills page that intimidation and perception has gone up. All right, and then finally I'm going to drop the city watch into the background, and you should see that the other two, athletics and insight, have also been applied to that particular character. Okay, so the basic aspect of it is done. Now comes the complicated part. Before we get into that, though, I just want to make a point of clarification here. These two skills are going to be different for every background. So, for instance, a courtier will have insight and persuasion. A guildmaster will have insight and persuasion as well. Inheritor? What do they got? Oops. Scroll past them. Skills. So they get survival plus one of these three. So every background is going to have a different set of skills that you will gain. It won't be these two skills all the time. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear before we moved on to the next step. So the more complicated bit comes into play just by customizing your equipment and making sure that your languages are configured or set the way that you want them to be. So if you look at your abilities tab, which is the third tab down, you'll see that you have the word choice here and two of your choice. Essentially what that means is you're going to get one to start. It could be common, it could be dwarven, could be elvish, depends on the race you have selected. Could be abyssal if you chose one of the abyssal races. But your background is going to sometimes add additional languages based on the background. And there's a good chance that you might start with one extra that is there from either your class or your race. I think it's typically the race that determines how many you can choose. So in this case, I'll be able to add 3 additional languages to this particular character. The starting common one, a language of my choosing, and then 2 additional ones that I have chosen that would make sense to apply to the background that you imagine the character came from. So City Watch, maybe you served in Waterdeep, maybe you served in Baldur's Gate, maybe you served in a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere, or in a city in the middle of nowhere. Things like that. You're going to want to choose languages that make sense for the character and the background location where you think you're starting that character off of. And that's where your imagination is going to want to come into play, and an understanding of the world that you're going to be playing in. So Forgotten Realms, for example, whether it's Eberron or one of the other worlds that are out there, heck, you might even be starting in Ravenloft if your DM starting off in that particular setting. So you'll want to work with the DM when it comes to the languages. The starting equipment, as you're starting at level 1, you're going to want to stick to the equipment that's on the actual character sheet. I actually can't believe it, but I'm sitting here pointing at the screen with my hand, even though you can't see me. So with that in mind, let's actually go to the inventory sheet first, and we'll deal with the equipment, and then we'll circle back to the languages. And I'll show you some examples as to some of the thought processes around those languages. So on the character sheet, it is the 4th tab down is your inventory page. If encumbrance is enabled, then this will start counting out the amount of weight of equipment that you're carrying and subtract that here. So this is what you can carry as a maximum. This is what you can push as a character, and that's because of the 18 strength that this character has. I'm currently carrying nothing, so the weight is 0. This is where treasure is going to be for Forgotten Realms. That is the standard platinum pieces, gold pieces, electrum pieces, silver pieces, copper pieces, and then there's gems. And then this line here can also be added. So you might have 10 times gemstone, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Now you're not going to start with that. Typically, your background provides your starting gold in relation to this. Now, for the starting equipment, fighters can wear all types of armor. They can wield shields, and they can use both simple and martial weapons, which means typically you can start off with a longsword or a short sword. Martial weapon would be a longsword, for example. Short sword would be a simple weapon. All armor, that could be plate armor, chainmail armor, splint armor, leather armor, studded armor, that kind of thing. And your shields can range from your small little buckler, full-blown tower shields. But that's what you can use. It doesn't mean that's what you start off with. This list here, and it is going to be available on most of the supplement guide starting sheets, or class sheets, I should say. However, if a particular class sheet does not provide a list of starting equipment, but that is not the only location where that particular class is defined, maybe it's also defined with the player's handbook, you're going to want to defer to the player's handbook. So in the case of Xanthar's guide, the starting equipment is provided and the links to the starting equipment is available. I do not believe it points you to different equipment tables. I think it does, in fact, take you to the same tables. Actually, it looks like it might provide access to a different. It does. Okay, so that is good to know. So if you are planning on choosing a list of equipment, then it might make sense to look at a combination of the two tables. So you might want to take a chance and look at the other supplements to see if that's actually there. I actually did not know that was even possible. I always thought it linked to the same sheet. Okay, so this is actually good to know. Now, in relation to Forgotten Realms, chances are an anti-manta rifle doesn't exist as a starting weapon. That would be just a little bit too powerful, especially when it does 68 necrotic damage. Holy crap. Yeah, that would not be something you'd be starting off with in any campaign that I have. For the most part, though, yeah, I would recommend sticking with the player's handbook side now. Musket or a pistol, yeah, I could see that being a starting equipment, but these are martial ranged weapons. So none of those would be something that a particular fighter could actually choose based off of the fact that you don't get any of those weapons here. Okay? All right, so I just wanted to point that out. Now, for starting equipment, I'm just going to drag this up so that it's next to the character sheet. I'm going to make sure that I've got the inventory tab open here. Give myself a little bit of space. And the armor, I might as well open that now. And I'm kind of curious whether, I don't need the background open. So let's move this there, that there. I don't believe Xanthar's has a different armor table. Maybe it does. Maybe that's why it's linked here. Nope, that links to the same one. Okay, so there is some additional starting equipment and there is some additional tools maybe. All right, so I'm just going to pop open all of the tables here. Okay, that's the same armor. There's definitely two equipment tables, and that looks like that is the same. Yeah, that is the same. Okay, so typically you just want to work your way down. So I'm either going to go with chainmail or leather longbow and 20 arrows. Now, City Guard, it's conceivable that chainmail would be something that they had. You can always double check because you also get some starting equipment with your background. Okay, so maybe this guy was an archer. His dexterity, not that great. That kind of tells me he's not going to be good with archery. So I'm going to go with the chain shirt. Now, it says chain mail. So you'll note that there's a difference here. There's chainmail or a chain shirt. There is, in fact, a difference. You'll notice this with the armor class. So chainmail gives you a 16, whereas a chain shirt gives you 13. You actually want to look at the definition of the wording that they have here. So this implies chainmail. That means, oops, I always do that. That he's going to have a chain shirt. Now, if you look at the weight, there's also a difference there. So a chain shirt is 20 pounds, whereas a full chainmail suit of armor is 55 pounds. And it requires a minimum strength of 13. And that is also something that you want to take into account. Does your character have the actual strength to be able to wield that particular armor? All right, is there any other piece of equipment here that I'm going to be bringing out? Light crossbow, 2 hand axes? Nope. No. And no. Okay, so we're done with the armor table. Now, a martial weapon and a shield, or 2 martial weapons. So, in relation to that, you are starting off with martial weapons, and they typically refer to melee weapons. As you can see here, a longsword falls into that, a rapier or a scimitar falls into that. A short sword does, fall under that, and it is a finesse-based weapon. A longsword is a versatile weapon, which means you can hold it two-handed or one-handed. I'm gonna go with. Let's see. I'm gonna go with a longsword and a short sword combination, and I will show you why I'm gonna do that here in a moment. So longsword and short sword. And a simple melee weapon. So I was actually mistaken. Short sword's not a simple melee weapon. But a dagger or javelin, stuff like that, hand axes are. Yeah, we'll stick with that for now. Okay. I also get a light crossbow and 20 bolts or 2 hand axes. I'm going to go with the hand axes because this guy is not very good with ranged weaponry, and a hand axe would make a little bit more sense for his type of character. And Dungeoneer's pack or Explorer's pack. So, the adventuring table here, these are poisons. We are not going to be dealing with poisons, so we don't need to worry about that particular table. And we are done with the weapons for now. The background, yeah, there's no additional weapons coming through from here. But there's a good chance we'll need both of these tables for both completing the class as well as the actual background. All right, so I'm going to go with an Explorer's pack. Let's see what that looks like. And a Dungeoneer's pack. So when you choose this pack is going to expand out to a large amount of equipment that's thrown into there. And the list of the equipment that is provided is available in this particular list here. So 10 days of rations, 10 days of rations, 50 feet of rope, 50 feet of rope, water skin, bedroll, medkit. It makes more sense for the Explorer's pack in this case than it would be for the Dungeoneer's pack. But that could also apply. Maybe this particular individual is busy dealing with underground caverns or underground ruins, things like that. And the Dungeoneer's pack would make sense in that particular case. But his stats kind of imply he's more of an adventurer rather than and less of a researcher, if you will. He's too well-rounded around here, but he does have the strength to run it through. So I'm going to go with the Explorer's pack in this particular case. So when you have a choice of packs, you're going to want to consider additional parts of your character's background that you yourself want to be able to tie into that particular character. And that's the reason why I did the selection that I did here, because it makes more sense. This is a city watch. He got tired with the watch, potentially, and decided to leave the city, or he'd finished serving out his duties, like maybe that particular city watch he had to serve 5 years and he's done, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of things, but I don't see him, based on his stats, actually going through and raiding dungeons and being looking for artifacts, things like that. I see him more along the lines of being along the open road and just going from one town to another. That's the way that I see him. Or her. I haven't decided that particular side of the character. And that's the other thing that you want to do. Note that if you are a guy and you're playing a girl's character, or a girl character, good luck with the voice, unless you can actually do it. All right, next. Okay, so that completes the selection of this particular set of equipment. Now you want to go to your background. So you will notice there is no uniform there. There are clothes. And typically uniforms in my worlds come from fine clothes or a costume. I typically will encourage someone to use the costume side of it and then just drag that down and now I'm making this generic. Wow, I can't type today. Uniform. But you're going to want to choose your style and rank. And the DM is going to want to make sure that the rank makes sense for the character that you are starting. A level 1 character is not going to have the rank of general, for example. It's conceivable that you could have reached sergeant, maybe lieutenant if you push it, but you're not going to get anything higher than that. Most cases, let's say Neverwinter. I can't remember the name of this watch in Neverwinter, so I'll come back to that. Uniform, rank, private. Maybe he didn't really succeed. He was there for brawn, not necessarily for brains. A horn. So we're going to have a horn, which I believe might be under here. Yes. Manacles. I'm not sure why you still carry around manacles. And a pouch. Okay, anything I miss? Rank, indicative of your rank, horn, manacles, pouch, and 10 gold. So 10 gold pieces was your stipend that you left for that particular thing. So I'm just going to pause the video and come up with a watch name for one of the Neverwinter. Okay, I think I probably cut myself off a little bit too quick there when I did the pause for the video, but in any event, where did I put the uniform? Uniform's down here. Everything does get sorted by alphabetical and or by location, so I'll show you that here in a moment. There. So they're literally just called the Neverwinter City Watch or Neverwinter Guard. So I'm just going to go with that. All right. So these are worn. So he's happy and proud. This is worn, which means it's equipped, in my opinion. Backpack is not going to be empty. Bedroll is going to be in the back, and you'll notice that as I start typing, it picks up an existing item that happens to already exist in your inventory. You don't really need to finish typing, you just move the down arrow and it will throw that particular item onto that particular location. Oops. Makes sense that he's going to have the horn in a location that's readily accessible. I'm looking for the name of, okay, backpack, belt, rations, backpack. Alright, so that's all of the items. And if you switch out and then switch back, it should have organized everything into the location. But everything here is indented a little bit. Scabbard, that's what I'm looking for. Hip scabbard. He's right-handed, so left scabbard. think that's how I spelled it, and right. Okay. Right. All right, so I'm just going to temporarily close that, open that up, and it still didn't organize it. That is strange. Anyway, what'll happen is at some point, this will actually go through and sort it so that the backpack items are literally indented just below the backpack. I'm not sure why that is currently not working, but that's generally what happens. And locations are typically read after the alphabetical name. So the name of the item is here, and then all the items associated that happen to be stuffed into it, for example, will be listed next. Then the next alphabetically ordered name that isn't part of that backpack, for example, will be listed next, so on and so forth. So that's how it'll generally organize it. And the reason why you want to do this, is because if you happen to drop your backpack, all the items that are in it go with it, which means you lose your rations or your tinderbox and water skin, stuff like that. You don't want to have to manually go through and, oh crap, I've thrown out my backpack, or my backpack fell off my back while I was climbing a cliff. You're just going to want to click that rather than all of the individual items here to get rid of it, meaning you're going to have to go down and get it, kind of thing. Now, there are also two states. You'll see here, this is carried, this is equipped. Okay? Equipped items will show up in the actions page if they have an associated action. So, for example, your hand axes here, they will show up in this category. Your longsword and your short sword will also show up. But armor is equipped. It doesn't show up here. It shows up and affects your armor class here. So if you unequip your armor, where's the chainmail? There it is there. You see that your armor class changes. Obviously, if it's carried, your armor class doesn't get changed. It stays as it is. So you want to make sure that certain equipment that should be equipped is in fact equipped. There is a mod or extension that a DM can get. I don't know if it's available for the Unity version yet, but it also adds a column here for attunement, and that is for magical weapons that you have to attune yourself to. And that's really just an indication that you have taken the time to become attuned to that particular weapon. So it's really just an indicator. It doesn't add any additional functionality to the overall interface outside of that column. Now you'll note that there are two hand axes, and you're going to want to make sure that that is equal to the number of hand axes you have. The reason being is that a hand axe both can be used as a melee weapon and as a ranged weapon. There's no difference between the attack or the actual damage that you're going to do. But if you're going to be attacking with the hand axe in a melee method, you're going to want to use this because it does tell the game how you're dealing with it. And that's why that symbol is actually here. If you're going to be throwing it, then you're going to want to make sure that you use this attack and this roll for damage. That way, this will automatically account for the fact that you have now thrown one of your hand axes, and it will tick it off and drop that to 1, that kind of thing. Actually, I don't think it changes the number, but it does indicate that it's used. So if you don't remember to go collect it, you've now lost one of your hand axes, that kind of thing. Same with longbows, short bows, stuff like that. There'll be an armor or an ammunition counter that pops up, and you'll want to make sure that the starting amount that you have is equal to the number of pips that you need there. And then you've got your longsword and your short sword. Okay, so that is the equipment. Now let's go and deal with the languages. The languages in the game can be found under the player's handbook. Oops, let's just get everything closed. I don't need you, and I don't need you anymore, but I do still need the class thing. Oops, go away. All right, so the player's handbook, you want to open up this reference manual. Expand this so that it expands out, and then search for languages. You don't need to use the full name. Languages, there it is. Okay. So, within this are going to be all of the various type of languages that your world is going to have available to you. Now, Eberron might have different languages than what the Forgotten Realms worlds have. And Ravenloft will have different languages potentially than what those two worlds will actually have. So that is something that you'll want to consider. As a DM, I generally allow players to pick from this standard list of languages. And this is the actual list of languages here. This is typically the speakers that will make use of it. And then the script here is the language that, if you choose the language selection from here, which I currently don't appear to be able to do, on the DM side I can, but not on this side, then what it will do is it will update the font that is in place for when you're typing it, so that if you choose to speak Dwarvish, for instance, only those players that actually understand the Dwarvish language will see and understand what it is that you typed. So it's a good way to send messages back and forth. There is another table here for exotic languages. As a DM, I will typically only allow specific backgrounds and specific classes to potentially make use of this. For instance, an abyssal, whether it's an abyssal race or a celestial race. So in Azamar, for example, I might allow for celestial language, whereas a tiefling I might allow for abyssal or draconic languages. Well, maybe not so much draconic, but possibly infernal, because they might have experience with those particular things based on their family history. But an orc being able to speak primordial, probably not going to happen. Or a tabaxi being able to speak Sylvan, well, that one I could see. But deep speech, probably not. Those kinds of things. So you're going to want to choose languages that make sense for the area you're starting in, and imagine the types of people that your character is going to have been introduced to or interacted with. So in the case of Neverwinter, which is where I'm going to base this particular character out of, there's a good chance that he's run into some dwarves, so Dwarvish. And you're going to want to type it exactly as you see it in this column here. And let's see, Elvish. And let's go with Orc. There's a few orcs that may have come through in there. Okay, so those are the languages, and that's literally all it is to it. So next, what we're going to deal with are your abilities, and those are going to be a little bit more complicated because some of them are going to have actions, some of them are not. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, there are a couple of things that can come into play. When you first start off with a fighter, you're going to get a handful of abilities, and they're called features. Not feats, but features. And they are fairly straightforward in what they do. Now, this one came from the background, and this one might be a bit more complicated from any other skill that you have. And why I have opened these up is some of them might actually apply to an actual feature or ability that you can make use of within a combat scenario. Second Wind, for example, is a perfect example of that. So I'm just going to drag that into place by grabbing this eye and throwing it into place. And what you can see is it has a heal effect. And that gives you the ability to potentially heal yourself 1d10 plus 1 hit points in the middle of combat. Now, it got thrown under this category called powers. That doesn't really make sense because it's not really a power. It's more of a class-specific role. So what I tend to do is make sure that I'm under preparation and group when I do this. And the mode doesn't really much matter so much as the group in this case. I'm going to make sure that this is under the fighter category, and I'm just going to hit the tab key to select out of that particular field box, and you'll see that the actual category has gone through and updated, and this is also updated. Now what that does is that gives you the ability under a combat situation to make use of this particular capability. You don't have to have that expanded out. So as you as a fighter gain additional actionable features and abilities, you'll want to make sure that you drag and drop them into here. Problem is, not every ability has a mappable action item that you can actually throw into there. And as a result, sometimes you might have to go through and actually create an effect. And I do plan on putting together a tutorial video on how to do that as soon as I have some concrete examples that I will give to you. Dragonborn's breath weapon, for example, is a perfect example of that. But in this case, literally Second Wind is going to be your only actionable item. This is primarily a role-playing based skill that has been given to you by your background. So as a result, it doesn't really get an actual actionable item. But 1 second here. Okay, but there is one thing that I want to point out. While this is a role-playing aspect of it, it can change your skill set. So I'm not going to be using the Investigator variant in this particular case for Watcher's Eye. I'm going to stick with its natural one, which gives you the ability to make a request to the DM to be able to allow you to track down and spot outposts within a city that might represent the Watch, or like the local sheriff's office, for example. But at the same time, you can more or less spot where criminal activity is most prevalent and stuff like that. So you can identify those organizations. But the variant gives you the ability to investigate crimes, and in this particular case, and if you do decide to go that route, your athletics skill, you'd lose your proficiency in that, but you would gain a proficiency in investigation. So here's an example of a background that has a trick associated with it, but it doesn't give you any actionable item. You just can make a request of the DM, hey, going through these particular areas, I'd like to keep my eyes open for either the local sheriff's office or see if there's any criminal activity that I can identify, or the dens of criminals that I can identify as I pass by. And that's what you'll make use of that particular skill. Okay, fighting style is a bit different, because fighting style allows you a number of different ways to wield your weapons, and you gain different benefits and or bonuses based on that. All right, an example of that: great weapon fighting. If I were to use my longsword as a two-handed weapon, which is the restriction, it's the versatile, then I could make use of this great weapon fighting skill. And you have to decide this at the time you create your character. These are all of the styles that you can choose now. And if you look on your skill, or on your class sheet there, where is it here? In some cases, you get to choose an additional fighting style. I think the champion might have one, for example. And it might be under your archetypes, for the most part, where you get to choose an additional fighting style. But there are times where you get to actually have that option, where you get to choose an additional fighting style. Okay, so you could potentially have a fighter that has multiple combinations of these fighting styles. So in this particular case, great weapon fighting or two-weapon fighting would make sense for a character that would work with the Battle Master and maybe the champion. Not so much with the Eldritch Knight. That may be a defense capability or protection capability. The champion might benefit from the dueling, those kinds of things. So again, you have to keep in mind your choice of archetype that you wish to go with in reference to the type of fighting style that you wish to choose. And there's no wrong answer here. You can choose whatever style you want, but to really gain the full benefit of your archetype, you're going to want to have a fighting style that's going to match very nicely right from the get-go. Now, for the purposes of this example, because I'm creating a fighter and I haven't really chosen an archetype because I'm pretty much going to be running through them all, there's a bit of a tough call for me here. I'm going to lean right now to great weapon fighting, And the reason for that is because that's going to tie into a problem that I want to highlight. And that is this ability to re-roll on a 1 or a 2. So with that in mind, I'm going to make note. Weapon fighting. Okay. And that just tells the DM when he or she looks at your character sheet that the fighting style you have chosen is the great weapon fighting style. And it's done so as part of your specialty. So you get to choose one at the time you create. You can't take any additional fighting option more than once, even if you later get to choose again. So you could not, for example, take great weapon fighting style a second time and gain additional bonuses or proficiency in it, for example. Now, the reason I've highlighted this one is because when you roll an attack roll, so let's say I'm attacking a goblin, that's going to be a miss. Let's say I attack again, and that is, wow, that's still going to be a miss. Okay, so let's say that one hits. Well, in the case of and now I rolled it there, but I really could have done this. Just double click that, and it will roll it. But anyway, so for the case of the longsword, if I'm using it in a two-handed fighting style, this isn't going to apply. And the reason for that is because with a longsword, you can do 1d10 points of damage, not 1d8 plus 4. So you do 1d10 plus 4 points of damage. All right. There's a little bit of setup here that you might want to go through and do. So this one here represents one-handed style. So I'm going to say one-handed. If I could spell handed right. There we go. And what that means is that I'm using that in one hand and potentially using my short sword in another, although my short sword's not going to make use of any bonuses if I do that way, because I don't have the two-weapon fighting style. What I can then do is create a new item, and this will be a longsword. Okay. There we go. And it is carried, although you can make that equipped, I guess. And then what I want to do for this is add 1d10 times base plus the bonus, and it is slashing. I'm pretty certain that is all I have to do. So, if I use this for one-handed, I click this. If I use this for two-handed, I double-click this. All right. Now, there's a catch here, because if I roll a 1 or a 2, in this case, I now have to re-roll that. There's no easy automatic way to do that. You can do this 1d10, reroll 1, reroll 2, do that once, and drag that to a short slot so that when you roll, you do your attack, that's a hit, you roll this, and in theory, if you get a 1 or a 2, and of course now I'm not getting one, that'd be a 7. Am I going to roll every other number? There we go. You see that it automatically re-rolled. Now, there is a bug right now in that it re-rolled again. That's not correct. It should only do it once. Must use the new roll, even if the roll is 1 or 2. So that's kind of the restriction with this particular one. I've already reported this issue. I don't know if it's going to get looked at or not, but we'll see. But this would be a fix that you could potentially use to actually make use of that skill once they fix the re-roll requirement. So even though you rolled a 1 on the first roll, technically this one should have been used. It should not have re-rolled using and giving you the 3. So that is one way that you could do it to work around that particular problem. So you can still roll this to do your damage, and I rolled that twice. So you would do 6, and then you just drag this number here onto the creature that you're actually hitting for damage, rather than rolling this here. I'm hoping they give us the ability to make the adjustment here, but this is the way that you would actually go through and do it. So now the problem is there is potentially a second. Okay, good. It didn't actually add one. And in Classic Edition, it would go through and add an inventory item. So in this case, there, now it's equipped. So this is actually the same sword. It just so happens that you have two different ways to actually use it. This would be your versatile weapon. This would be the normal way you would use it. All right. So that is how to set up your actions page. Before I forget, there's actually one more thing that I would like to point out, and that is that we're not quite done with Second Wind. As you can see as part of its description here, you can, when you finish a short rest or a long rest, is when you regain the ability to make use of it again. The problem is this is a daily use skill. So under preparation, that's when you can see how many times you can use it per day, and the fact that it is going to require a long rest in order for you to regain the skill. That's incorrect against according to the description. So what you can actually do is set that to 1 and change this to rest. And under combat, you can now go through the process. You can use it, and then indicate that you've used it. But now it's gone. The only way it will actually return is if the DM executes a short rest, which is what I've just done here, or make use of it, tag that I've used it, a long rest. And as you can see, in both cases, it returns. This is what we want, and this is how we want to set that particular skill up. So whenever you add an additional ability to your actions page, whether it's under the fighter category or one of your other archetype categories, then you're going to want to make sure that you read through the description, and make sure that the actual preparation aspect of it is set right. You could be shortchanging yourself if there's an ability that you can get back after a short rest, but it's currently configured for only getting it back during a long rest. And that's something that you and the DM can work through on getting set up if you're not sure how to do it. But hopefully this video has shown you how you can now go ahead and do that. And I honestly don't know why the player or a fighter action sheet currently has spell slots listed, although they're all zeros, but still it's there. Now, it makes sense for an Eldritch Knight, because at level 3 you get a level 1 spell slot. Character level 3, you get a level 1 spell slot. All right, so again, that is the how you go through and set up Second Wind. And what we're going to do next is actually go through the process of leveling up a character. So we've gone through, we've used it, we've gotten our first experience level, so now we're level 2. And what we'll want to do is go ahead and level the character up. Well, there's a lot of stuff that's taken care of for us. And one of the most common questions I get, and I still don't understand why that is actually blank. That should be a D10 representation there. Yeah, anyway. In order to gain access to leveling up your character, there are two ways to do it. If you don't already have your class open, you can get to it again by going to the class sheet, and you should always use the basest module available. And what I mean by that is that the player's handbook is where the fighter is initially presented. The supplements add archetypes to the actual class. So I always recommend using the base one. And the easiest and safest way to actually go about doing that is to click this magnifying glass that is next to your fighter class and open up the character or the class sheet. And what that will do is that will always take you back to the class you built it off of, or the class sheet you built it off of. Now, to level it up, you literally just drag that particular fighter class sheet on top of the class that you have gone through and dealt with. All right, and got configured. Now, there are a couple of things that have been added. Action Surge, for instance, has now been added. Additional hit points have now been added. There should now be 2 hit die here, although I don't know why it's still showing white, because you're now level 2. So under your abilities page, you should now see Action Surge. This is a actionable thing, in the sense that the DM is going to want to know that you're going to use it. In addition, you need a short or a long rest before you can actually use it again. So this is the perfect situation to match it up with your second wind. Now, dropping it under the fighter category in the classic edition would have dropped it into this same category. That doesn't seem to work. Oops, I don't want that. I want this group. But it's very easy to fix just by going through and making sure that you update it, and it will move it into the right location. So once again, this is a once a use, before a rest, and then you can go ahead and do it. Now, there is no action item here that you can make use of. You're literally just going to say, I'm going to use this. Now the DM knows that you have used it, and now you can do your second action. Another thing to note is you get additional uses at higher levels. So at level 17, you can now use it 2 times. So let me execute a short rest here. Bring that back. When you let's say this character reaches level 17, you will then just simply modify this number, and you'll be able to use it twice before you lose the ability to use it. So that is simply how you take care of that change. And this might actually fix that for you now that you've got this part of the level. I've never had a character reach level 17 yet, so I don't know. But we're going to see what that looks like when we go through this particular process. Okay, so that is now how to level up your character. It is that simple. It is literally that simple. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up this character, and that way I can use it for the archetype specific levels. And then within each of those particular archetype classes will be the remaining leveling of this particular character. Because it's now going to be tied to the archetype. It's no longer going to be a generic fighter. So essentially, your fighter, quote unquote, dies at level 3, and you now become either a champion or battle master or Eldritch Knight or Purple Knight of the Purple Dragon, or whatever it is that you have chosen for your archetype. Okay, so if you wish to continue, please choose the archetype that you plan on playing through, and you'll see the rest of the description on how to level this character up there. Okay,